Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Danielle Stackis and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. We're excited that you're able to join us for today's webinar, Web Trends for 2019, What You Need to Know, presented by Erika Dickstein, Chief Insight Officer of Spring Insight Marketing, LLC. This webinar is part of the Smith Office of Alumni Relations Professional Development Webinar Series, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. During the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box to share any questions or comments you might have for the presenter. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and Erika will address them at the end of the presentation. Erika is the founder of Spring Insight. She has extensive experience in solving business problems using web tools and creating innovative marketing campaigns. She has spoken on internet strategy for small business to groups such as the Virginia Women's Business Conference and the Bethesda Chevy Chase Chamber of Commerce. Prior to founding Spring Insight, Erika spent over a decade working in e-commerce marketing and online product management. She headed up marketing for Discern, LLC, an internet retailer 500 company. Additionally, she led complex interactive web projects for companies such as AOL and the Graduate Management Admission Council. Erika started her marketing career working for the Walt Disney Company. She holds an MBA from the University of Maryland. And now we will get started. Erika, take it away.
Thank you, Danielle. And thanks for saying such lovely things. So I have to say, I'd like to consider myself a great marketer, but as good of a marketer as I am an even better procrastinator. So as I started to think about, when we started first talking about doing this topic, instead of getting started immediately on figuring out what are the web trends I wanted to talk about, I was thinking about really productive ways of procrastinating around it while seeming like I'm really busy. So the first thing that I did was actually looked up the word trend, because nothing gets a presentation started like looking the word up in the dictionary. But it actually turned out to be a really interesting. It turned out to be sort of an interesting result that I thought would help me in preparing the discussion that we're having. So trend, if you Google it, there are two definitions in the dictionary. So the first one is a general direction in which something is developing or changing, and the second one is a fashion. And as I was looking up this very topic and looking at what are people talking about as web trends for 2019, I found a lot of information about this second area. So what are the fashion for websites? What kinds of font choices are people making in 2019, or information about whether or not design is going to be flat this year or layered, or whether or not people are using bold geometric patterns, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a dearth of information about the first one, which is sort of the general direction that things are going from a business perspective. And so what I want to do for our time together is really to focus on those pieces, to focus on the pieces that are sort of the general big picture items that really influence business and that are going to make it so that we either fall behind or move ahead in 2019. So the first part, I broke the information that we're going to talk about into two pieces. The first part is the if you don't want to fall behind. So I feel like this part is a little bit the taxes part. Like this isn't the fun stuff. This isn't the cool stuff that like we look at and we're like, oh yay, this is kind of cool, the things we can do to the website. These are the things that we got to take care of or else stuff goes wrong. So we're going to start talking about Google. If you can't tell by my visual reference here, Google is the 800-pound gorilla of internet marketing. And by that, what I mean is because of the size of the market that they hold, they're really able to make decisions about what's going to happen on an industry-wide basis. When they make a decision that they want industry to move in a direction on websites, then all of us who work in this industry say, okay, Google, we will now move in that direction. So there's two areas that I wanted to talk about where Google has sort of made a statement, you are going to move in the direction we want to, and we're right now reacting. So the first one is a decision they made last year, which is they want all websites to be secure. And by the way, I should warn everybody, I reserve the right to use, Danielle was kind enough to share an attendee list. I reserve the right to go into everybody's websites and use websites of people who are on the call. But I did obscure everybody's URLs so that saving the names of the innocent. Anyway, so Chrome is about 61% of the market, and they made a change in late last year that changed that if websites were not secure, so didn't have SSL certificates, they would have sort of this not secure at the beginning, as you can see here. And so the reason that they did this, just to give a little bit of background of where Google's coming from on this, is an SSL certificate keeps information secure from the point. Now, we're not, if somebody is in a coffee shop and they're on a public Wi-Fi, that's a little bit of a different scenario. So we'll sort of put that. But assuming that somebody from the part where they initiate themselves, where they initiate communication, is secure from their computer to the website that they're visiting and back. This assures that it is completely secure. If somebody, if a site is not secure, then a bad actor can actually take over that site and be able to take over that connection and be able to sort of make it look like a website has information that it doesn't. So anyway, right now, this is what, as of today, this is what it looks like when a website is not secure. You sort of see this gray not secure. Well, Google has already told us that this is not where they're going to stop. The next thing they're going to do is they're actually going to take what now is sort of grayish and is a circle with an eye, and they're going to take it and they're going to now make it into a, they're going to make it red, and they're going to make it into a triangle. And while they haven't said this, my assumption is that the thing they're going to do after that is they're actually going to do what they do now with privacy errors, and they're actually going to stop traffic with an interstitial that pops up and says this is not secure, and that you have to go to click an advance button to be able to get there. So clearly everybody has to resolve that before that happens, because that will, even if you're not seeing much of a drop in traffic because of the SSL error, you definitely will. So then, so in terms of what you're going to do next, and by the way, I'll mention at the end of this presentation, Danielle will be circulating information. That information will include both a link to this Prezi, but it will also include a reference page that you can, whatever I say here, when I say run this kind of check, there will be on there a link to somewhere where you can actually take care of that. I didn't want everybody busy writing down long URLs instead of listening to my dulcet tones here on the presentation. So you can run an SSL check. Bluntly speaking, you can actually just look at the top of your browser, and just like the one I showed you, if it says not secure, it's not secure. You can also run an SSL check. This one is for most companies, this one's a fairly easy fix. Your web hosting company can get an SSL certificate put in place fairly easily. If your organization has a larger website, if you're bringing in content from other places, it might be a little bit more challenging, and you might need to work with a development firm. But this one generally is not the heaviest lift. So the next place we're really seeing Google sort of influence the market is in page speed. And in particular, they care a lot, not just about the desktop page speed, but they care a lot about mobile page speed. So here's another site from an audience member that I pulled up, and I ran a speed test on the site. And as you can see, the site is okay on desktop, but it is way too slow on mobile. And so Google's really going to, so what Google has said is that they're now putting that into the algorithm, and they're going to start degrading the results. Basically, you're not going to be able to rank as high if your site is slower. They recently developed a platform called AMP, and I'm not going to go very far into this because that's when everybody is going to start complaining to Danielle that I got way too technical and nobody understood where I was. So I'm not going to get into that, but I kind of have a long-term suspicion that what they're going to try and do is get everybody to adopt that as a standard platform for websites like mobile responsive is right now. Right now, though, AMP is really being promoted for publishers, but I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see that. So anybody who is in the process of starting a redesign of their site will definitely want to talk to the development team that you're using to see if they know anything about AMP and whether or not your site would be appropriate for that. So what should you do right now? Run a test on your site. Again, on the reference material that I send out, I'll have a link to how you can do that. And then work with the developers on speeding everything up. Now, the good news is when you run that test, it actually will have a list that Google gives you very clear direction. This is slowing you up, this is slowing you up, this is slowing you up. Unfortunately, it's not exactly like a recipe. Add flour and then everything will be sped up. It can be a little bit harder to do, but at least they kind of give you a sense of where to get started. So next we're going to talk about privacy. It's very funny, as Danielle mentioned, that I'm a University of Maryland graduate. I graduated in the year 2000 and went to work for AOL. And back then, this was sort of the height of the internet. And I kind of remember this was a very famous cartoon from that period. On the internet, no one knows your dog. There was this idea that everybody was on the internet typing as whoever they wanted and in this completely anonymous state. Well, I think we all know from recent news that is absolutely not the case anymore. Just like you are no more anonymous on the web as you are really walking down in the UK where they have all the CCTVs up. People are always keeping an eye on you. And so we're really seeing a lot of government regulation around privacy, which is, I think, a bit of a reaction, not I think, it is a reaction to that lack of privacy on the web. We heard a lot last year about GDPR, but even putting aside GDPR, a few years prior to that, California passed something called CalOPA, the California Online Privacy Protection Act, and that basically states that everybody has to have a privacy policy. So GDPR, which came out last year, I think somewhere in the May area, it's a much heavier lift with GDPR. That's not just privacy policy. That's got some right to forget components. That's got some parts of some cookie policies. So there's all kinds of information that you have to do for that. And while it is true, you sort of need to think through with all of these. Well, what's my liability? The first thing you can do, of course, is to talk to a lawyer. My sort of layman's talk on this is if you have a website here in the United States, you need to make sure you have a privacy policy because California, at minimum, requires it. So that's not just a European thing. Whether or not, look, my au pair, who's staying here in the United States but is an EU citizen, if she comes and looks at your website, by definition, by the way that this was originally passed, yes, it is a violation of GDPR, even though she lives here in the United States. If she looks at your website and it doesn't, and it's not GDPR compliant. But the question is, and I think that this is the question businesses need to ask themselves is, are they really marketing to Europe? You know, look, the fact that somebody here comes and looks at a United States website, does that mean that the European government is going to come after a small company that's not promoting themselves in Europe? Probably not. But at minimum, it's definitely something you're going to want to think about the privacy policy. So in terms of what do you do next? Does your site have a privacy policy? If not, make sure it does. Does your organization solicit any business in the EU? And if so, you want to really consider becoming EU compliant. There are online tools available to help with the privacy policy and the cookie policy. And again, on the document that I circulated, there's a company that we use called IUBenda, and that will allow that will work with you on getting together the privacy policy and GDPR compliance. I think, I know what I was going to say, but obviously the other option is to see a lawyer, because that we are talking about legal issues on that one. So the next thing we're going to talk about is accessibility. So just like buildings have accessibility requirements, so do websites. In terms of what does a accessible website look like, that's making sure that there's sufficient contrast with the colors that you're using, making sure the fonts, not using sort of scripty, crazy fonts, making sure that that all of the verbiage that you're using on a website is written in text, and that you're not communicating anything via image, so that people who are using readers are able to sort of access all that information. The accessibility front is an interesting one, and it's one where starting in late 2018, I started seeing a lot of lawsuits happening. This is one where the schools are way out ahead of us, but business hasn't really been on the bleeding front of making sure that their websites are accessible. So we're seeing a lot of lawsuits against companies that don't have accessible websites. And actually, it's funny, because in preparation, while I was sort of starting to think about this presentation, the news broke that the management company that is behind Beyonce got sued over their website not being sufficiently accessible. So this is sort of a sample. It's a fan of hers who wanted to be able to see it and wasn't able to manage the site with her reader. So something to keep in mind. What to do next? All of mine seem to say run a test, but that is the first place to start. And then this is one that you would need to work with a developer or technology team to solve the issues. And unfortunately, of all of the ones I'm telling you about, this one is the most difficult, mostly because we do not yet on the website have packaged technologies that make this easier. So for any of you who are out there who are looking for market opportunities, I think this is actually a great market opportunity, is to create plugins for the big for the big platforms, to be able to sort of automatically ask the right questions and then put in the features that make websites accessible, because that unfortunately does not yet exist. So Danielle, surely somebody is going to take that and develop that for me, right?
Absolutely.
I thought so. Are there any, before I head on to the next section, are there any questions that make sense to answer on the go behind part?
I think you can keep going for now. Awesome.
Okay. So now we get to go to the fun part, which is not just the boring, like, okay, the taxes part, but the really interesting part of, so what are we seeing that's interesting and new in sites? So the first thing that I'm seeing a lot of, and I'm hoping that I'm going to see even more of, is personalization of sites. So, you go to a homepage and you see the homepage of the site. Now, if you think about it, though, e-commerce has been personalizing your site for a long time. If you yesterday went to Amazon and you looked at a new book that your sister told you about, today when you go to Amazon again, you better believe that book is going to be on the front on the homepage of the site. Well, up until recently, the technology really hasn't been there for small businesses to be able to do this kind of personalization. And now we're starting to see small companies that are able to make this very affordable for small businesses. And on our side, as a web strategy firm, we're starting to have a lot of fun with how we can use these kinds of softwares to really, update home pages based on different attributes for people who come to your website. So the one I pulled up originally, the first one is location-based. As you can see, this is a KinderCare. They have different centers all around the country. Well, when you pull it up, it says you have 26 centers nearby because it knows where you are. We've done it at our firm also with websites that, so a company that has operations in Philadelphia and in Washington, D.C., where we will make the call to action something like, to get in touch with the best X organization in Washington, D.C., click here. To get in touch with the best organization in Philadelphia, click here. You can also personalize based on, you can even change hero images so that if you want to give a little bit of local color here in the DC area and you want to show, I don't think at the moment you would want to show the White House or the or Congress, but that's a whole nother issue for a whole nother webinar. But if you wanted to show something local that would draw people into that, sort of give that local frame of reference, you absolutely can. But interestingly enough, location is actually not the only thing that you can do this based on. You can do industry. So industry is a little bit trickier because with location, it knows where your IP address is. So if you're coming from a Philadelphia-based IP address, it knows that it gives you the Philadelphia-based one. So it's a little bit trickier to know what business somebody is in just based on their IP address. So a lot of times when you see this done or when we've done this, what we're doing is we're doing it based on where people are linking from. So if you're linking, let's say you're linking from some sort of directory that says, these people are looking for divorce attorneys. So let's say, okay, let's give an example of a law firm. If you're a law firm, and what you can do is, you likely have different directories that point to you as a specialist in different areas. You can, if somebody is coming from something that's pointing to you as a specialist in divorce, you would then have the homepage say, we are the best at getting you divorced painlessly. But then if somebody is coming in for small business representation, we help your small business grow. So those are some examples of how you might do that by industry. In addition to these two examples that I pulled out for you to see, there are lots of other ways that you can see this kind of personalization. The service that we use allows you to personalize based not just on location and industry, but also as I said, by URL, interestingly, weather. I always think that's a super weird one. So that's location, and then they know what it's a rain. That's one's great for brick and mortar. It's a rainy day outside. Come in and have some coffee. Time of day. But one that I think is actually super interesting. I meant to grab an example of this so that you could see it. But returning visits and first-time visitors. So you might have your normal homepage come up for a first-time visitor, and then for a returning visitor, you might say, "Hey, you're back. You know, how can we convince you that this is the time that you'll give us that you'll get started in working with us?" So I think those are really cool ways, and I'm totally excited. Have been totally excited to sort of really get my hands dirty with clients in getting those set up and seeing how they work. So some recommended vendors, and again, don't worry about writing these down. There's a vendor that we like quite a bit and that we use quite a bit called Unless. And then there's another one that's a little bit more popular called Optimizely. And that one is created particularly for A/B testing. So if you want to try different kinds of variants of your homepage and see which one is working better. We're seeing a lot, hold on, let's get a sip of water. In late 2019, in late 2018, I'm fast forwarding us through the year already. We started seeing a lot of chatbots in particular, and the chatbots are getting smarter. So I wanted to sort of talk about this as as something that you see. The example chatbot that I gave here is actually a smart one that will, not only will it ask you what you need, but it'll ask you sort of the general area of your questions so that it can get you to the right person. And this is a very interesting one for organizations who maybe have a lot of people come to their site and they're not converting, or they leave confused. And this is a way of getting people to the right places. The two vendors that I've seen that I really like, just actually recently just changed its name. They offer sort of a comprehensive service. I bring them up because this one does work well, their chatbot, and it is literally for small businesses free. So it is it's a quick and easy one to set up, and it's a good one to sort of use to get your feet wet and see whether or not that's something that you want to invest more time and energy into. And then the second one is Live Person. And that's a more complicated one that allows you to sort of do that real more AI feel, where you do the layered type of information and are able to get more out of it. I mean, the point of those is to actually have somebody communicate less with an actual person and to be able to get at more information. And I know, some organizations that have lots of sort of simple issues, technology issues, that they just need somebody to quickly troubleshoot, have been able to sort of do that with these bots in a way that, probably for those of us on the other end might make us want to like stick our fist through a wall because we're so irritated at not getting the right answer. But sometimes, every once in a while, it actually does work. And I know for a lot of organizations being able to sort of satisfy that without using the human hours is beneficial. So an organization like Live Person would be able to help set up sort of some of those more complicated bots. So finally, we're going to talk about, in terms of the prepared area, and I wanted to leave a bunch of time to be able to answer questions, because I know sometimes the most sort of satisfying discussion can happen in Q&A. But I wanted to talk a bit about data-informed design, and this is, I think, for me, and the work that we do, some of the most exciting stuff that I'm seeing, which is, with the democratization of information and with sort of big data being able to come to smaller businesses, we're really able to see a lot more just data about our what's happening on websites, and that has been super beneficial in being able to design websites and being able to sort of understand what changes need to happen. So what you're looking at right now is a heat map of my organizational website. So if you know, if you and I were to have a conversation about what's working on my website, I'm not taking a guess. I'm not trying to ponder what somebody told me a while back. I'm actually able to look at my heat map and I'm able to see, you know, okay, what are people clicking on? Well, you know, let's take a look. So the most commonly clicked item, the one that's completely red over here, that's our blog, which makes a lot of sense because that's where all of the newest content, comes from. And what's next is the next piece is marketing, which also, is websites, and that also makes sense because we're really known as a website strategy firm. So a lot of people who come to look at us are looking at our website section. And then you can see over here, it's a little bit spread out, but the big, huge, gigantic schedule a free consultation button is probably the third area. So we know that's working. We know that's working pretty well. But one of the things that this does is, as we're starting to think about what are changes that we want to make, we're not making decisions based on sort of that, you know, going backwards, that piece that I was saying, the fashion piece. We're not looking at and saying, oh well, you know, serif fonts are on trend right now, so let's start with that information. But instead, we're starting with, hey, what do we know is attracting the eyeballs, and we're able to build on that. So in addition to sort of just being able to see the big picture of what's happening on our website, we can also, this is where we get into the somewhat creepy technology. I think it's cool. Other people might think it's a little creepy. But this is a video, which I'm going to be quiet for a second so everybody can watch it. So what you're watching right now is somebody traversing my website. You're able to, I'm gonna run it one more time while I sort of talk through it. So what this is, as I said, this is somebody traversing my website. We're not able to see out from the computer. We're not able to see the actual human, but we're able to see, where is she clicking? What is she looking at? What is she looking for? And we're able to see, you know, there are certain pages we have this set up on our website. We're able to see, are there certain things that where we're losing people. So so we have a form on our site that collects information. So if you want to start a project with us, it's a big form and it collects all kinds of information. Well, you know what? As I was looking at these videos, I noticed we had 2 or 3 people who were filling out that form, and I would see them get to the website where you need to enter your website address, and that was a required field, and they would get tripped up and then they left. And what I realized is, hey, wait a minute, if you're a new business and you want to talk to us about building a website, you don't have a website to be able to fill that in. So that was tripping people up, and they were leaving the site without having finished that form. Now, they weren't getting in touch with me from other ways, so I wouldn't have actually been able to know that had I not had access to these videos to be able to look, you know, to be able to look and see how people are traversing the site. So cool. Creepy though it might be, it's super, super helpful in sort of understanding what people are looking at on your site and being able to get get and utilize that information. So the recommended, I'm only putting one recommended vendor here. It's a company called Hotjar, and both of the 2 things that you just saw, both the heat map and the videos are provided by Hotjar, and both of them were done with a free account. So if you can get that much really awesome actionable information for free, I just haven't looked for a different vendor because I really like them so much. So sort of concluding what we're talking about, my conclusion here is teenagers are a pain in the tush, which might seem like a little bit of a might seem like a non sequitur, but as I was giving this presentation, practicing for this presentation so that I could make sure that I was perfect for all of you, I gave this presentation first to my two kids, my 12-year-old and my 17-year-old. And as soon as I finished, my 17-year-old said, well, Mom, is your website accessible? And I had to like sort of hang my head in shame and say, no, actually, you know what? I'm giving this presentation, but my website is not accessible. Well, is your website? And so she went through each and every one and asked me where I lived up to the various items that I was promoting on this presentation. And on a lot of them, yes, no, my site is not accessible. Yes, my site is SSL compliant. Yes, I do satisfy CalOPA. So what I wanted to talk about here is the fact that I'm talking about these and telling you these are really cool things to look at does not mean, hey, everybody, drop everything you're doing. These are the things you have to take care of. If your site is not compliant, is not secure, yes, that is something that you need to take care of right away. But in terms of handicapped in terms of the accessibility issue, is it likely that you're going to be sued in the next year? Probably not, but it is really a good thing to start to think about if you're looking at building another site. These are all things that you kind of want to, just like everything else that we decided in business school, where you're running, where you're making decisions based on ROI, figure out what is the risk and what are the opportunities. And I think that's where, where I would leave it as, I'm not saying, okay, drop everything, but these are, I wanted to give you the right information to be able to think through the various decisions on the various items. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, Danielle, to any questions that we have.
Okay, thank you so much, Erika. As she mentioned, we'll go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So one of the first questions we have here is, you've shared a bunch of these different options and these trends. Do you tend to be very experimental with technology?
Thank you. Great question. So I do. I love trying out new technologies. So I tend to, there's places where you can get like AppSumo, or just various places where you can get different kinds of technologies that you can sort of try out. A lot of them are things that I'm like, oh, I cannot believe I spent money on that. And then other ones we find, oh my God, unless actually that was one that I found sort of via experimentation. And then we sort of slowly, as we find successes, make them available to our client base. But what I would say for other organizations is, that's what we do. So of course it makes sense that we experiment. It's really easy to get shiny object syndrome, which I am very much guilty of. So I would say for most businesses, really the answer is experimentation is fine, but just make sure you're getting the basics right first.
Great. Another question came in about GDPR, and recently there was a big company in the last few days that had some violations with that. So would you say perhaps that's one of the most important things for people to focus on, or how would they get started with something like that?
I mean, you know, it's an interesting, so GDPR is so complicated, and the bar is very high. And the question that I ask my clients when we talk about it: do you promote your organization in Europe? And yes, it is true. And this is what I mentioned. My au pair, who's living here in Bethesda, Maryland, in our house, is an EU citizen. So if she comes and visits my website, GDPR covers that, even though she is sitting in a computer in Bethesda looking at the website of an organization that's in Bethesda. So what I would say is but I know that I'm not promoting my business at all to Europe, and as a matter of fact, really do not. So I don't suspect that the European Union is going to waste a lot of time coming after a small web company in Bethesda, Maryland. But if your company is larger, and in particular, if your company, you know, we have another client which is a small non-for-profit. It's an association, but that association provides does meetings every year in Europe. So we have been very careful to make sure that they are GDPR compliant, because they are actually soliciting they're soliciting business from Europe. So that has been my personal sort of place on it. I do think that the larger the organization and the deeper the pockets, the more likely it is, and that's certainly something we're seeing also on the accessibility front, is unfortunately you do also get bad actors. I don't necessarily know that the Beyonce fan is this person, but you do get bad actors who sort of say, okay, well, this site isn't I'm using accessibility because that's the accessibility one is a private sector one as opposed to a public sector one. So that has even, you know, that means that there can be sort of just somebody who files opportunistic lawsuits if they feel that somebody has deep pockets, and they're going to be able to get at them. So, you know, that those are always the risks. In terms of where would I go from this? I think it depends on the organization, but it certainly is something that you want to be on top of and assess your organizational risk.
Great. So you talked about speed, and we have a question here that's asking about video. Do you see video as an increasing trend despite potential slowdowns in performance of the website, and how is video being used?
Yeah, you know what? I really wanted to add a video. I really wanted to add something into my conversation about video, because you really do hear a lot about, and video is just such a presence, and it really is such a positive thing on websites. But I wasn't able to sort of formulate the right point of, like, this is something that I'm seeing that I think is something you should do, because obviously video on websites isn't much of a trend. I wasn't able to sort of come up with what the right video one was. But all that said, I do think that video is I do think video is an absolute good thing. One thing you can do is, if for whatever reason, I mean, most sites don't host their own video, right? Most sites have the video embedded, and they bring it in from another site, such as YouTube or, you know, Vimeo or Wistia. They're actually just bringing in these. They're actually just bringing in these things, and those are large enough organizations that they really want to keep things fast. So they're investing a lot of money in making sure that things are fast. But what I would say is, if the video is slowing down mobile, is you can also make a decision. You can also make a decision to leave anything that slows mobile down off on mobile, so that you're able to sort of have the fastest possible mobile, and thus have and thus have sort of the desktop, the full experience in mobile, maybe a little bit more stripped down, but faster. And I think that's sort of one way of getting around it. But yeah, you definitely, video is one of those places where organizationally, I'm a big believer in video. A lot of the organizations that I work with don't have the budget to be able to do a lot of video. So I haven't worked with it quite as much as I'd like to. I have a little bit of video envy, but there are some. But I certainly do think that it is beneficial to sites, and I've read a lot of a lot of reports about sort of the impact on having the same thing in a video versus a long sort of sales page, and how much more the video converts than having the long sales page. So absolutely, good question.
Okay, another question here. How big of a priority is SEO in relation to other trends?
So SEO I didn't talk about well, actually that's not true. The speed, the part where I was talking about speed is an SEO trend, because what I was saying, and I apologize if this wasn't clear, was Google will degrade you, will mark you down, basically. Their algorithm will hold it against you if your site is not fast. So thus, that is a place where your SEO will suffer because you are not, so that is absolutely an SEO one. I actually think in the long run, while it is not yet, I suspect that secure sites will also become an SEO issue, because I suspect, as I said, they have not done this yet, but I do believe that in the future, Google will probably also knock down non-secure websites. So that is that also, I think, becomes part of the overall SEO puzzle. SEO in general it's a tricky one, and it really depends on the industry that you're in. What I have found is that industries where you have anything at all that can be kind of niche, where somebody can look for you and be able to find you when you're looking for anything specialty at all, you're going to be so much more successful on SEO. So we have a specialized plastics manufacturer who builds super specialized pieces, and he's a superstar on SEO, because what people are searching for is a bit more of a rarity. It's a bit more of a rare bird, and we can build around that. But for most of us mere mortals who are sort of walking around in these worlds, SEO is not a world for my organization, for Spring Insight, that I play around in at all, because I would spend so much money trying to be competitive for website strategy. It's not a place where I think it's value added for me to play. So I think it depends on. I hate giving the answer. It depends on the organization, because that feels like a cop out, but it really does. If it's an organization, as I said, so years ago I bought shutters for my house, and because our house is mission style, I looked for mission style shutters and was able to find the exact perfect organization, the exact website, and was able to sort of get, so that I think is a place where, yes, if you build that kind of thing, and then SEO is huge, and that's sort of a specialty thing and is somewhat niche. But on the other hand, somebody who's competing in the divorce lawyers arena, that's so freaking competitive. they might be better off working with various kinds of directories or different sorts of marketing opportunities that, public speaking, that they're able to sort of have more control over and aren't competitive. Good question.
Okay, we have a couple more questions here. The next one is on visual trends. What are the visual trends on websites that you see in terms of design? And their example was interactive sites, parallax designs, one page versus multiple pages.
So somebody wants to actually know the number two piece that I said that I was going to very cautiously very cautiously avoid. So parallax has been with us. So for anybody who doesn't know what parallax is, that is when you have sort of some parts of the site that stay static, whereas when you scroll, things sort of come in and out of focus. It's kind of cool. It was really, really trendy. When it first came out, I was seeing it used poorly a lot, and I'm starting now, I'm really interested to see now, I'm seeing it used in much more interesting and usable ways. As a web strategy professional, I tend to really hate when I see design used for the sake of design and not for the sake of driving business. And so I think I'm starting to see parallax used in that way. So I'm glad to see that. Let's see, one-page sites. Thank the Lord. Those god-awful things are really have been going out of style. I'm so giddy with delight because I think they are a usability nightmare, and they're certainly a nightmare from being able to sort of do any sort of trackability. I think we're continuing to see a lot of the hero image get bigger and bigger, and I personally think that does come a bit at the price of usability, because we really are sort of getting imagery. We're still seeing imagery to the that sometimes is so robust that it actually gets in the way of conversion, which the whole point is conversion. We stopped seeing in 2019, so 2018 I think was the year we stopped. Like 2017 I think was the year that every single new site had that silent video that ran in the background. And I was actually I found that to be an intriguing, I found that to be sort of an intriguing direction, and was a little bit surprised last year to see that that sort of continue to diminish. And I think that might be, I think that's likely. That goes back to the earlier question about speed versus design, and I think that probably was sort of starting to slow up sites. But those are the big, I know I've definitely seen a lot more bold colors. In terms of design, I'm seeing a lot of, this is the year of serif fonts. So every new site that I'm seeing is done with these big bold colors, geometric things, and serif fonts. So hopefully that I suspect that comes from one of the design professionals in the room. But those are my thoughts. And actually, whoever sent that, if you are a design professional, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
All right, we'll take one last question here, and this is, will 5G change the landscape of web trends, specifically mobile site speed?
Will, say one more time.
Will 5G change the landscape of web trends? So it appears to be a question about the mobile site speed and whatever carrier you have. Yeah,
that's a good question. It's not one that I can speak very knowledgeably about, because I'm not very familiar with the 5G landscape. What I would say is, it's certainly, everything changes. The website landscape the website landscape, I mean, to some extent, I feel like having a business in this industry is having a desk on a surfboard. Just constantly are dealing with whatever the waves, and so I mean, it almost certainly will. Whether or not, I'm not familiar enough with the technology to be able to say how. But what I will say is that the big sort of redesign points with websites come in. Wow, this is see, only 22 of you are left, and I'm about to say something totally brilliant. And look at you guys. You waited the whole time, so you can hear it. Whereas those other losers left early and are going to miss this brilliant statement. There are sort of points where with websites where you get to, you can sort of nurse your website along and make improvements to them, and then large shifts in technology happen, and everybody has to completely redesign, because to be able to bring the state of to bring your website up to the state of current technology, you can't just patch it. So the most recent one was when we went to mobile responsive. So when mobile responsive became the sort of the be all, and I do think that mobile speed and possibly AMP is going to be. I think that's the next place. I don't think we have what that industry standard is going to be yet. Whether it's going to be AMP, whether it's going to be like what that is quite yet. But I do believe that we are overdue since mobile responsive, that was sort of in the 2013, 2014 arena. We are overdue for having one of these large shifts that makes it so that, all the organizations over the course of a year or two, the sites we need to address the technology of the platform. Hopefully that answered the question, despite my not actually knowing the answer to the question.
Great. Thank you so much, Erika. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
Thank you so much. I was very subtle in leaving my phone number and email address up for this last part. I'm happy to chat with anybody about doing website assessments of their sites. And Danielle, I know, is going to circulate a link to the Prezi that I presented. And also that resource sheet that will give people access to the various tests and vendors that I described.
Yes, we'll also send a recording of today's webinar, and it'll be posted on our website. So we hope you will all join us for our next webinar, Career Transitions, How to Change Lanes or Advance Forward with Ease, on Wednesday, February 6th at 12 p.m. Eastern. And again, thank you so much, Erika. This was very informative, and we hope everyone on this call has a wonderful day, and go Terps.